My wife's best friend called me and said, "Your wife is kissing a strange man at the restaurant." In that second, the ground seemed to give way beneath my feet. I didn't ask any more questions. I didn't demand an explanation, I didn't even breathe. I left where I was and drove straight to the restaurant she mentioned, my heart pounding in my chest as if it wanted to escape before I could. The world went silent as I entered the main dining room, my eyes scanning each table. And then, there she was. The woman with whom I'd shared years of life, plans, Sunday mornings, pains, and victories, had her hand on the face of a man I'd never seen, smiling in that way that until then I'd thought was unique to me. When she noticed me, she backed away as if struck by an electric current, her eyes wide and her mouth half open, like someone caught in the middle of a crime. But it was too late. Too late for everything. Too late for any excuses, any rehearsed lies, any attempt to repair a vase that had been crushed by the force of contempt. I turned my back and walked away without a word. There, in that moment, in silence, it all ended. The strangest thing is that, as much as I imagined what I would do if I were ever betrayed, none of those soap opera-like reactions occurred. I didn't scream, I didn't break anything, I didn't cause a scene. I just died inside. In silence. Because when you're betrayed, it's not just the fact that hurts. It's the time that hurts. It hurts everything that was built. It hurts to remember the promises made with tearful eyes. It hurts to remember the night she leaned against me and said, "I'll never leave you, I'll never deceive you." It hurts to know that while I thought I was living a solid love, she was preparing a hidden ruin. It hurts, above all, to realize that I'll never know when she stopped loving me. Or worse, if she ever truly loved me. In the days that followed, she tried to justify herself. She rang the doorbell. She sent messages. He called in the middle of the night saying he needed to explain. But nothing she could say would change the scene that was etched in my memory like a slow-motion movie. Her hands on another man's face. The laughter. The complicity in their eyes. It wasn't a fling. It wasn't a one-night stand. It was something that already existed. A space I never knew had opened between us, and that another man filled without even asking permission. And that's when something inside me decided I didn't need to listen anymore. I didn't want to understand anymore. He had already understood enough to leave. She said it was a mistake. That it was a mess. That she was going through a difficult time. That she felt alone. Alone, even with a husband who never failed her. Alone, even with an entire family around her. Alone, even though she was loved, desired, respected. And suddenly, this whole, being alone, thing sounded like the most selfish and convenient excuse anyone could give to justify their own cowardice. Because cheating isn't about neediness. It's about decision. It's about looking at someone who trusts you and choosing, anyway, to hurt them. Betrayal doesn't happen in bed. It happens in the averted glance. In the upside-down cell phone. In the hidden smile. In the secret that begins with an unimportant message that doesn't need to be said. Betrayal begins when you allow someone in where no one else should. That lover. He disappeared as soon as she tried to assert her feelings. When she looked for him to have something more, he disappeared. And that's when she knew the true weight of regret. Alone. Without him. Without me. Without anyone. Because people who love each other can't bear the weight of betrayal, and those who betray often can't bear the weight of staying with the person they used as an escape. She was left with emptiness. I was left with silence. This silence was my salvation. I didn't explode, I didn't seek revenge, I didn't lower myself to the same level. I rebuilt my life in silence. With slow steps, with pain, with sleepless nights and days where I pretended to be fine when inside I was in pieces. I rebuilt a little of myself each time I chose to move on without looking back. And it was in this rebuilding that I found someone new. Someone who offered me what I always deserved, loyalty, respect, and peace. A peace that didn't come from empty promises, but from the sincere presence of someone who didn't need to lie to feel alive. She loved me with the calm that heals and the intensity that protects. And then, months later, when things were back in place and my heart was finally beating in a different rhythm, she appeared. The woman who had once been everything in my life reappeared like someone wanting to come home after having burned down every wall. With sad eyes, her voice choked, she said she regretted it, that she now understood what she had done, that she had lost herself, but that she had never stopped loving me. I listened. For the first time, I truly heard everything she had to say. And I forgave. With a light heart, I forgave. Because forgiveness wasn't for her. It was for me. It was my freedom. But I made it clear, there was no more us. Forgiveness closed the door gently, but never reopened it. Today, she lives with the weight of having lost a true love because of a choice that lasted minutes. She lives with the image of me building a new life, lighter, more solid, more sincere. And me? I move on. In peace. And when I think about everything that happened, I realize that there is pain that frees us, even if it first breaks us completely. But what she never knew, what no one ever knew, is that the day she saw me getting married again, she was there. Hidden. Behind a tree. Crying. And I saw her. I saw her before I entered. And that's what you'll want to understand by the end of this story. Because there are looks that say everything words never dare to confess. Welcome to the channel. Here, none type of betrayal is romanticized, on the contrary, we believe that loyalty is what sustains any true love. All the stories told are fiction, but they carry hard truths. Betrayal destroys, hurts and exacts a very high price. Now get ready. Because what you're about to hear next, will leave you breathless. Good story. His name was Daniel, hers was Emily. When they met, nothing in the world seemed as right as the two of them together. It was in a bookstore, on a cold late afternoon, when their eyes met by accident among the shelves of used romance novels. He held a copy of Love in the Time of Cholera. She leafed through Pride and Prejudice, as if she already knew the ending but enjoyed reliving it. There was something peaceful in the way she smiled, something that spoke of calm and storm at the same time. Daniel, a man with restrained gestures and a deep gaze, carried in his heart the legacy of a home that taught him respect, permanence, and words spoken with intention. Emily came from a more chaotic background, separated parents, broken promises, a certain fear that everything was fleeting. Yet, when they were together, the world seemed to make sense. He was firm, she intense. He loved silently, she with urgency. And perhaps it was precisely this combination that created, in those early years, something everyone around them called true love. They lived in a modest but cozy house, with large windows that let the sun flood into the living room on Sunday mornings. The coffee was almost always bitter because Daniel forgot to add sugar, and Emily would complain, laughing, as she picked up the spoon. The paintings on the walls were chosen together, photos of simple trips, handwritten notes, poems stuck with tape. It wasn't just a house, it was a home where everything held memories. Where every corner told a piece of the story they were building. They had a habit of holding hands even after years of living together, and it wasn't uncommon to be seen laughing at inside jokes that only made sense to the two of them. They shared everything, the couch, the silences, the bills, the household chores, the daily worries, the plans for the future. They planned children, long trips, kitchen renovations, the following year's wedding anniversary. Routine, with them, never meant boredom. It was security. It was comfort. It was the place they always returned to after difficult days. Daniel was a history teacher at a local school. He had a particular way of talking about time, as if each era had a beating heart, as if the events of the past carried emotions as vivid as those of today. His students admired him, his colleagues respected him, and parents entrusted their children to him without hesitation. He was a man of simple habits, enjoying morning walks, watching documentaries at night, and listening to jazz while cooking dinner on Fridays. Emily said he was a man from another era, the kind they don't make anymore, who knew how to listen, who knew how to stay. She worked as a freelance photographer, and although the work was unstable, she was passionate about what she did. She saw beauty in the details that went unnoticed by others, a fallen leaf, the shadow of a streetlight, someone's reflection in a shop window. She had restless eyes, a sensitive heart, and a constant rush to experience everything intensely. Perhaps that was why she was so captivating. She didn't feign calm, she didn't hide her feelings, she was whole, even when it hurt. In the early years, their love seemed unshakable. They argued sometimes, of course. Like any couple. But nothing that lasted longer than necessary. They fought over trivialities, over schedule mismatches, over differences of opinion, but they always ended up finding each other in the embrace that seemed to solve everything. They had mutual friends, an active social life, and enjoyed entertaining at home and hosting impromptu dinners with cheap wine and long conversations. Emily was more extroverted, Daniel more reserved. But together, they balanced each other like two pieces of the same puzzle. He admired her spontaneous nature, she respected his steadfastness. He offered ground, she offered sky. And amidst this dance of opposites, they created a world of their own. Weekends were always the best days. They used to wake up late, make pancakes together, and listen to music while cleaning the house. In the afternoons, they'd go out photography, walk, watch old movies, or simply sit in a cafe and talk about everything. At night, sometimes they'd invite friends over, sometimes they'd prefer to be alone. There was something special about the silences they shared, that kind of comfortable silence that only exists between those who truly love each other. Their eyes said what words didn't need to repeat. Time passed, and with it came the most serious challenges. Financial problems, fatigue, scheduling conflicts, doubts. But even during the most turbulent times, the foundation remained solid. The complicity was still there. And when it seemed like everything would fall apart, they found a way to find each other again. Emily, her sensitivity heightened, began to delve deeper into her own projects. She spent more time outdoors, meeting new people, exploring new ideas, breathing new air. Sometimes she returned home with sparkling eyes and stories Daniel didn't fully understand but listened to patiently. He, in turn, dedicated himself to finishing a book he'd been writing for years, a collection of chronicles about ordinary people and their small acts of greatness. They spent more time in different worlds, but they still found each other at the end of the day. There were still kisses on the forehead, hands intertwined, glances seeking comfort. There was still love. At least, that's what he believed. Friends said they were the perfect couple. That they exuded a sense of rare stability. That together they seemed to have conquered time. And, indeed, that was the impression they gave. Because Daniel was a man who deeply believed in permanence, and Emily always knew how to sustain the beauty of a moment. Perhaps what no one saw was what happened between the lines. In the longer silences. In the unexplained absences. In the glances that began to diverge. Something was changing. Slowly. Like someone moving a piece of furniture around each day until, before you know it, the room is already different. But Daniel didn't understand. He didn't want to understand. He still believed in love like someone who believes in something sacred. For him, Emily was his home. His definitive choice. And even when she was beginning to seem more distant, he attributed it to fatigue, the stress of work, the cycles of life. Never to the possibility of a real rift. Emily, on the other hand, seemed to be going through a phase of rediscovery. She began attending exhibitions alone, taking night classes, going out for coffee with coworkers without warning. She began to change her tone, her gestures, her schedule. When she spoke about herself, there was always a much stronger me than before. And Daniel, although he noticed this transformation, tried to support her, even without fully understanding. Because love, for him, was also accepting what you don't understand. Trusting in the darkness. Giving space without letting go. And that's what he did. Or at least he tried. The days continued to pass. And although the routine wasn't exactly the same, there were still traces of the love from before. The memories still lived in the house, the photos still hung on the walls, her scent still clung to the pillows. Daniel, in his silent way of loving, believed it was all just a phase. That true love endures. That time heals. And that if he remained there, steadfast, present, she would remain too. Because they were, the two of them, and the two of them were always enough. But some things can't be avoided. There are inner movements that, once started, take on a life of their own. And Emily was no longer the same woman she'd been before. Maybe she still loved him in some way, but not the way he loved her. Maybe she was trying to understand herself, or simply losing herself. Maybe she was searching for something she couldn't even name. What was certain was that there was a distance growing between them, invisible, but real. Daniel, even without understanding it, remained. Because for him, love wasn't about feeling, it was about choosing. And he had already chosen. Back then, everything was still standing. The home, the photos, the plans. There was still the set table, the Sunday pancakes, the notes on the mirror. There was still the soft music at the end of the day, the smell of coffee in the morning, the dreams spoken aloud. There was still, in every corner of the house, the story of a couple who believed in forever. But what Daniel didn't know was that something was about to break. And when it did, it wouldn't make a sound. It would be silent. And that silence would change everything forever. The call came on a random Tuesday, one of those days when the day dawns slowly, thoughts remain jumbled, and routine tries to hold everything together, as if cracks weren't forming inside. Daniel had just gotten off school, his shoulders tired, his mind still on his daughter's science fair rehearsal. The phone rang on the dashboard of his car, and without much thought, he answered. The voice on the other end trembled. It was clear, urgent, as if he were swallowing words so they wouldn't escape with guilt. It was Emily's best friend. Her voice said it all before the words even came out. I know I shouldn't interfere, but, she's here, right now, kissing a man in a restaurant near the square. I had to tell you. I'm sorry. Daniel didn't answer. He hung up. The world, until then in motion, seemed frozen in time. The car engine still running, his breath held, his chest silent. There was no anger. Not yet. There was a kind of dislocation, as if the pieces of reality had been put in the wrong place and suddenly he was seeing a puzzle he no longer recognized. He drove to the restaurant without thinking, his eyes fixed, his fingers clenched on the steering wheel. The voices in his head didn't shout. They whispered worse things. Arriving at the restaurant, he parked and got out as if crossing a minefield. There was still no pain, just a coldness he couldn't quite pinpoint. And then he went in. He looked around, scanning the tables, and his eyes stopped on a scene that, for a while, he tried to convince himself was the product of a delusion. Emily. Sitting at a corner table, holding a man's face in both hands, laughing with that gleam in her eyes that, for a long time, he thought was just for him. The kiss wasn't an accident. It wasn't a doubt. It was complete, open, a gesture full of certainty. When she saw him, she recoiled as if awakening from a trance. The man, unsure of what to do, looked around, grabbed his jacket, and left through the side door without saying a word. Emily tried to get up, call out, explain, but Daniel was already leaving. He said nothing. He simply turned away, with the dignity of someone who doesn't need a scandal to carry a pain the world would never understand. She tried to contact him. In the following days, she left messages, emails, notes on his door. She said she needed to talk, that nothing was as it seemed, that she was lost, confused, that it was a mistake, a slip-up, that he had always been the man in her life. But Daniel wouldn't listen. Not out of pride, but because the damage was already done. It was like a collapsed house, no matter how much he tried to rebuild, the ground was no longer safe. He didn't respond. He closed himself off. Silently, he began to distance himself from the pain, focusing on his daughter, his work, his own breathing. It took months for his heart to begin to slow. Months until he could look at himself in the mirror without feeling betrayed by his own image. Meanwhile, Emily fell apart. Her lover, the man she'd risked everything for, disappeared without a trace. As soon as he learned she was willing to leave her marriage, he vanished. He stopped responding to calls, blocked her on social media, and avoided the same places. She tried desperately to understand what had happened. She sent messages, wrote long texts saying she needed to talk. Nothing. And that's when it hit her. She wasn't special. She never had been. She was just another one. Another in a line of disposable conquests. But the worst was yet to come. What she never imagined was what would happen months later. On the day of Daniel's wedding to his new partner, a small ceremony, attended only by close friends and family, Emily showed up. She wasn't invited, obviously, but she was there. Hidden behind a tree near the outside of the hall, dressed discreetly, her eyes filled with grief and a silent cry that cut her face like a blade. She hadn't expected to be seen. But Daniel saw her. He saw her minutes before entering, as she prepared to walk down the aisle. Their eyes met for a moment. She, cowering, embarrassed, without the strength to escape or explain herself. He, serene, firm, with a tenderness in his eyes she hadn't seen since long before the betrayal. There was no anger. There was something worse, indifference. And then he walked in. And got married. And she stood there, alone, with teary eyes, listening to the applause in the background, like someone watching from outside the end of a story that was once hers. Weeks later, something even more painful revealed itself. A mutual friend handed Emily a letter written by Daniel. It wasn't a direct response, nor a request for confrontation. It was a rant he'd written months earlier, which he'd left with this friend as a record of his feelings. In it, he spoke of how he'd been destroyed inside, how he felt buried alive when he saw that scene in the restaurant, how everything they'd built had been torn down with a single gesture. But the most devastating part was the final passage. Daniel said he'd seen Emily on their wedding day. That he'd seen her eyes begging for a word. And that, in that moment, he understood everything. He understood that forgiving wasn't forgetting. That forgiving was simply accepting that certain things could never be the same again. That some doors, once closed, should never be opened again. And that, even though he still felt something, he chose to move on. For himself. For his daughter. For peace. Emily read the letter sitting on the floor of her living room. She cried like she hadn't cried since she was a teenager. She remembered every detail, the bitter coffee, the pancakes on Sundays, the note on the mirror, the low music on ordinary nights. She remembered the last time he hugged her, not knowing it would be the last. The last time he said, "I love you," with all his heart. And that was when she understood. Love hadn't ended because of betrayal. It had died the moment she decided someone outside the relationship deserved more attention than the one who was there every day. She had killed what she had dreamed of having her whole life. And now, all that was left was absence. Later that night, Emily returned to the restaurant where it all happened. She sat at the same table. Ordered the same wine. The same dish. She looked around, hoping to find some memory that would save her. But everything seemed different. The empty chair in front. The lost smile. The touch that would never return. She grabbed her phone and, on impulse, opened her photo gallery. The pictures of them together were still there. Trips, birthdays, ordinary days. An entire album of memories that now weighed like stones on her chest. And then she realized, the punishment for betrayal is not being abandoned. It's being forgotten. Replaced not by revenge, but by true love. Love she would never have again. On the way out, someone recognized her. An old friend. They spoke briefly, and in the end, the woman said something that echoed for days: "You had everything. But you chose emptiness." And there, in that moment, Emily understood that certain mistakes don't lead to second chances. Only eternal lessons. She had traded the love of her life for a momentary illusion. And that was her true punishment. Life followed its course as it always does, even when hearts still bleed. Time, while not completely erasing, has the power to reorganize pain, giving way to understanding and, for some, peace. Daniel rebuilt his life with firm, silent steps, like everything he ever did. He didn't need revenge, he didn't need sharp words, just space, time, and decisions consistent with the man he'd always been. He remarried someone who knew how to embrace the parts of him that had been wounded without trying to take anyone else's place, simply building something new, real, and light. The love that emerged afterward didn't have the same story, but it had the same value. It was different, but no less. It was a love based on conscious choices, mutual respect, and true presence. There was no rush, no comparisons. Just two whole hearts allowing themselves to begin anew after understanding what they deserve. The daughter, now grown, saw in her father the mirror of everything she longed to find in someone: firmness without harshness, kindness without weakness, love without restraint. The connection between them grew even stronger over time. She grew up seeing the example of someone who chose not to return the pain she received, but to transform it into maturity. Over time, she began to call her father's new wife her second mother, without guilt, without forcing. It was natural, like everything that springs from genuine affection. At home, weekends became lighter again, mealtimes brought laughter, and life, little by little, regained its flavor. Emily, on the other hand, was left with the weight of everything she lost. He tried to move on, but the relationships that followed were always shallow, restless, and unstable. No touch held the same firmness, no presence brought the same peace. Regret became part of her routine, and she realized that time doesn't heal what was destroyed by choice. He tried to reinvent himself in his career, move to a new city, erase his traces. But some stories stay with us, no matter how hard we try to hide them. She was never seen smiling with the same brightness as before. She could never again look into her daughter's eyes without feeling the wall that now separated them. She tried to get closer, subtle attempts to re-enter her daughter's life, but she wouldn't give in. Not out of malice, but because she'd learned to protect herself. One night, years later, Emily walked through the square where they used to stroll in silence on Sundays. She sat on the same bench as before, watching couples pass by, families play, time moving as if it didn't remember her. She looked to the side and saw a little girl laughing in her father's arms. For a moment, she was moved. She wanted to go back, wanted to do things differently, but she couldn't. The choices had been made. The doors were closed. And she knew it. She wept silently once more, like so many others since that day in the restaurant. But this time, she wasn't crying just for what she lost. She wept because she knew she was the only one responsible. There were no ones to blame but herself. And that hurt more than any betrayal could. At home, Daniel read a book while his wife set the table for dinner. His daughter came home from school and flopped down on the sofa, telling him about her day. Her life was simple, ordinary, beautiful. The past wasn't forgotten, but it no longer hurt. It had stopped being a wound and had become a lesson. His forgiveness for Emily didn't mean approval, it meant freedom. It no longer carried weight, hurt, or a desire for return. It carried only a mature understanding that some stories must end so others can begin. And that's how everything found its place. Emily, alone, but aware. Daniel, at peace, with a new family built on truth. Their daughter, loved, safe, learning to discern what's worth keeping close. Each carried on with what was left. And, above all, with what they'd learned. If you've made it this far, please comment below with your thoughts on this story. Do you believe some betrayals are forgivable? Or that certain choices can't be undone? Your opinion is very important here. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, activate the bell and share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. Betrayal isn't about a moment. It's about everything that's destroyed because of it: family, respect, trust, love, bonds. The damage is never limited to the other person. Betrayal destroys from the inside out, the perpetrator, the recipient, and the viewer. Here on the channel, we don't support, normalize, or romanticize any kind of betrayal. Our stories exist to show how serious and irreversible a choice made on impulse, out of vanity, or out of cowardice can be. And may this story serve as an eternal reminder: those who trade loyalty for adventure always end up alone. And those who truly love never need to deceive.